Welcome to the AirCon Vault, recordings of the live streams from AirWiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors: A Sound Effect, Game Audio Learning, Kilohertz, Audio Kinetic, Soundcuts, Tsugi, Boom Library, Sound Warriors, and AirWiggles, the online home for audio people.
Welcome to a very special live episode of Level with Emily Reese. First of all, we definitely here at Level, Sam and I want to say thank you for inviting us to be a part of AirCon24. Super special to do stuff like this. I love having these kinds of, special cornered off conversations. Sam Keenan is the producer of the show. I host it. I'm Emily Reese. And Sam and I started a show about music and games back in 2011. You can find us all over YouTube and Spotify, all the places. We're on summer break right now, so this is a very special treat to get to do this. And also a treat to have Maclaine Diemer here, who is a composer. He is our guest today. Hi, Maclaine.
Hi.
Maclaine has been a composer in games for like 15 years, Maclaine?
Not quite. So I've been in games for 16 years and composing for 12.
Okay, well, there you go. He's worked on a broad range of games. One of the things that we're going to touch on a lot about today, and today we'll talk about 3 of them, maybe more actually, in this conversation. My first introduction to Maclaine's music was Guild Wars 2, and he continues to compose for that game, more recently for the expansion called Secrets of the Obscure, which we'll talk about some of that music. Absolutely beautiful orchestral soundtrack where Maclaine explored a lot of polytonality and the orchestration techniques necessary to make that work. You can't just put a bunch of keys together and make it sound good. So that's a really cool project, Secrets of the Obscure from Guild Wars 2. Another recent project, Maclaine wrote the music for Firmament, like we were talking about just before we got going here, from Cyan Worlds. They made Myst and Riven. That came out in May 2023. We'll talk about that a bit. Firmament, completely different than Secrets of the Obscure.
Very different.
Firmament composed in that room in the box. Maclaine playing all the stuff, doing all the things. And we're going to hear about Maclaine's music for Crucible, which was a third-person multiplayer shooter that Amazon made and then sadly shut down later the year that it came out, 2020, May 2020. Very bad, yikesy timing, you know.
Well, we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that.
It might have been good.
We'll talk about that. So I'm going to stop very briefly, maybe more than briefly, and just say, hi, Maclaine. Thank you so much for doing this today. So grateful to have you on here to talk about these amazing projects and many more things. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. This is maybe the 4th time we've done one of these, or 5th.
But probably 5th, yeah.
Yeah, I have a blast every time. I remember the very first time I did it was for the Heart of Thorns expansion, like 2015, and I was living in a very small apartment, probably not much bigger than the room I'm in now, but with a kitchen and a bathroom and all that kind of stuff. In San Francisco, and I remember having to. I did the whole thing with a blanket over my head because the room I was in was very reverberant. I'm like, she's gonna kill me if I give her like very roomy audio from my side. So I was very warm that whole interview, if you must know.
That's before we started putting everything on. I was probably under a blanket too, to be honest. In 2015, I bet I was sitting under a blanket in my living room. That's so funny.
Yeah, professionals.
Yeah, professionals, exactly. Now we're on video. We can't quite get away with that, but just a pleasure to have you on. One of the reasons that, and I kind of alluded to this in the intro, that I like these 3 projects is how different they are and how quickly in succession, you're working on these things often together. Yeah. So Crucible is almost like if Secrets of the Obscure and Firmament got together, right? Because Crucible is much more hybrid. There's a lot of electronic portions with orchestra, correct?
Yeah, it's a pretty healthy dosage of synthesizers and other just manipulated sounds and things. And I would say the orchestra is important, but is almost just another flavor rather than the heart of it. It's like a third of it instead of half or 2/3.
Yeah. And then Secrets of the Obscure, largely orchestral, and Firmament, as we've said, the complete opposite. Where do you want to start, Maclaine? Do you want to start with some Guild Wars, or how are you feeling?
Well. Yeah. Let's start with that.
Well, let's hear a little bit of it. I can play some for you of just the main theme from Secrets of the Obscure, as long as I have the proper playlist up. All right, here we go. If you need me to turn it up, let me know if you need me to turn it up.
I think that sounds good. Maybe a little louder, Emily.
I love it so much. I love it so much. It's so, so, so beautiful and so good.
Thank you. Here, I was just going to post it in the chat just in case anybody want to have it in the background.
Oh, yeah, do it. Absolutely.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I like that one. I mean, you know, it's weird. You get when you do creative work, or maybe any work, honestly. You know, you have the full cycle of emotions, and usually, I think it's necessary, especially if you're going to try to do it to the professionally, where you're sort of constantly having to push yourself and dig deeper for new levels of inspiration. That you dislike it more often than you like it, right? And it's almost like a trope that the artist is in their own head and they're like, oh, all my stuff sucks and everybody else's stuff is great. Why can't my stuff be as good as anybody else's? And I do have those feelings, and I certainly hear probably more flaws than anybody does in my own work, just because I'm looking for what I can fix the next time. But I've gotten to the point now where I feel like I've settled in a little bit and I'm more confident in the stuff I do. And I'm like, you know, it's okay to admit if you like your own music. And sometimes I'm like, yes, it's pretty good, you know. And it takes like I wrote that, I don't know, a year and a half ago, maybe more, to be honest. Like probably end of 2022 is when I started coming up with that. So I'm quite a ways away from it, even though some people might have just heard it here for the first time. And it's like it needs that distance for me to feel good about it. Like the day after we record it or the day after the studio approves it, I'm like, okay, phew, I don't have to think of, I don't care if I even like it. They like it. I'm not going to question that. Let's move on to the next thing I got to get done. But now I'm like, yeah, there's some good stuff in here.
Yeah. Yeah. The horns, like Sam Phillip in the chat just said that the horns, I mean, goosebumps every time, just like, yes, give me more horn. It's just so, so good.
It feels like a cheat, honestly.
What?
It feels like a cheat. You know, you're just like, yeah, put the melody in the horn. I mean, violins playing the melody, horns playing the melody. It's like they do the work for you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things that's so, I think, really shocking about Secrets of the Obscure is the time amount that you had to write everything and record everything and have it all pushed out, which was about 4 months, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And that's tremendously unusual, especially, I think, for a game that size, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It was. Yeah. I will say that you know, it depends on who you talk to. When I talk to game people, they're shocked. If I talk to someone, because I live in Los Angeles, for people who don't know or can't read my hat or my Disneyland sweatshirt, I'm dressed like a child today, but it's fine.
It's game audio.
Yeah.
Or just audio in general.
But yeah, so when I talk to somebody who maybe works in television, that's like nothing for them, right? To do an hour of music, 4 months is like a luxury, but it's very different kinds of music, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not to denigrate the work that anybody does in any medium, but the demands of a television schedule, for instance, are brutal. And you might have to come up with an hour of music a week, or maybe if you're lucky, 10 days or 2 weeks.
True.
And so, you know, and you can hear it in the music, and I think it's fine because TV shows are more about driving the story, the drama, the dialogue, and they don't need big flashy music constantly. And maybe once an episode or once a season, you get to kind of flex your muscles a little bit. But that, yeah, so that doesn't mean it's any worse. But for games, it's very unusual. I mean, I've had games where I've worked on them for 2 years, you know, which is maybe a little on the long side. But if you're doing a huge game, I'm not sure exactly how long, but I know that the guys who did the Jedi Survivor and Jedi Fallen Order, you know, they get years because they might have to write a chunk of it, then see how it gets hooked up in the game, come back to it a few months later, maybe record a chunk of it, write some more, you know, and that can just take a very, very long time. So 4 months from no music to it's been written, recorded, and put in the game is extremely unusual, and it was kind of a breakneck pace for me personally. I'm also kind of a slow composer. Maybe I shouldn't say in case any TV executives are watching, but that maybe is not a medium that plays to my strengths because I kind of write pretty slow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do know that legendarily Enon Zur, who like the Fallout composer and Dragon Age and all kinds of things, he's apparently quite fast, I hear.
Yeah.
But that is unusual, I think. I think it's a little more normal to take your time with stuff, or creatively anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so that really amazes me with Secrets of the Obscure. And I know that you had other people help as well, which is common on big projects. But then there's I was going to say a game like Firmament, where, you know, that's pretty much all you. And talk a little bit about, you know, the I guess kind of the benefits to that, and also maybe some of the cons to doing it all yourself.
Sure. So with Firmament, for people who maybe are watching who haven't played it, like Emily said, it's made by a studio called Cyan Worlds, who are you know, it's amazing that they're still around. I love the fact that they're still around making games, but they are they're sort of on the map for me. They're in the history of gaming. They're foundational, right? They made a game called Myst in the 90s, which was, you know, I have my little Lego Myst linking book that I bought from them, which I love, and it opens up and it's got the image of the Myst Island.
Amazing.
It's my little talisman I keep on my desk. But yeah, so Myst was massive, right? Like it was inescapable in the 90s. I think I don't know exactly how many millions of copies it sold, but it was just like, it was advertised everywhere. It was sort of a perennial bestseller. It's what you dream of when you make a game, is that it just constantly, you put it out on a new platform, it sells. And then Riven was kind of a big creative leap for them, because I think any of those people that worked on it will admit that Myst was, the story of it was almost a mistake, right? It really felt like the Wild West. The story of them making it is incredible, and would take way too long to get into here. But it really is the dream of like two brothers started a company, you know, essentially in their garage, and then had brought a couple of other friends in, and then all of a sudden were appearing in ads for Apple, you know, Macintosh, and in Gap ads and things like that. I mean, it's really unbelievable. And the two guys who's the Rand and Robin Miller, the two brothers who started the company, are very humble, very thoughtful people, but very creative. So they made this game. They were making this game called Firmament, which is not in the Myst world, but is definitely akin to it. It's a cousin, right? And they sort of invented this environmental puzzle solving and storytelling mechanics that we take for granted. Like when you're playing Uncharted 4 and you end up in a cave, and there's no, you know that, okay, for the next hour, there's going to be no bad guys. I have to get this, you know, mine cart from that side of the cave to that side, but there's a big chunk of water in the middle, and I got to figure out which levers to flip and which wheels to turn. That's Myst. I mean, they did that, right? Up until then, it was jumping on Goombas' heads and trying to find the Master Sword, which is fine. Also very foundational game experiences, but Myst created that. So it's a very important game to me, as you can probably tell. And I can't believe I got to work on it still. So for the music, you know, Myst has and Riven have very specific sounds.
An emu.
What's that?
Right? Didn't you buy an emu? Yeah.
Yes, it's over. It's back there now. It's this thing right here.
The synthesizer. Yeah, the synthesizer that they used.
The Emu Proteus Master Performance System plus Orchestral. I managed to find one. That's the keyboard that the entire Myst soundtrack was written on. Riven was on a couple other synths that I don't own yet, but maybe I will someday. But yeah, so I wanted to sort of honor the tradition of that studio's music. There's in the entire history of the studio, there's only been and I guess the Myst series, there was a couple of them that were made by Ubisoft and not made by Cyan, like Myst 3, 4, and 5. But there's only ever been 4 people that have written music for their games. There was Robin Miller, who did Myst and Riven, in addition to founding the company and doing art and design and all this other stuff. There was, oh my gosh, I'm blanking. I'm on the spot. So there was Jack Wall, who did Myst 3 through 5, I think. And Jack Wall is another sort of legend of game music. There was, oh my gosh, Tim Larkin, I think.
Tim Larkin?
Should I fact check that?
Yeah, do it. Tim Larkin's up at Valve now.
Yes, so that is him.
Great trumpet player too, P.S.
Yeah, Tim Larkin. So Tim, when Ubisoft took over Myst 3 through whatever, Cyan was still making Myst adjacent. They tried to make an MMO, I think, called Uru, Ages of Myst. And so Tim did the music for that before leaving it. And he's been at Valve now for probably 20 years and has worked on everything they've done as a legend in his own right. So those 3 got Titans, right? And then me.
Yeah. Not and me. It's like and you. It's like
I don't know. Yeah. I don't feel like I'm in that same pantheon, but I guess I am, at least on Wikipedia. So, it was important to me to honor that legacy and do something different. And they asked for something different. They didn't want the sort of pizzicato strings that you're used to hearing in the Myst series, or the sort of, oboes and woodwinds and things. They wanted it droney and dark and textural, and I thought, great. I've been itching to do that kind of sound for years. And as much as I love working on Guild Wars, because I love big, like, thematic material and lush and romantic and all that stuff, I have, you can't see it, but just off camera here, I have a whole wall of synthesizers. I got a whole rack of weird, archaic gear over here. I've got my master performance system in the corner there. Another big synth back here behind me, this Yamaha. And so, like, I never get to use them because Guild Wars is not the kind of game that has a lot of synths on it.
True.
So this was a chance, and it came at this time in my schedule where I had like about 6 to 8 months to work on it. So because I'm slow, I thought, well, that's great. I can really take my time with this, and I tried to do it. For people who don't know the setting of the game, I really don't want to spoil it in case people should go out and play it. And it's on PC and PC VR, and you can play it either in VR or 2D. It's on Steam, I think, and then it'll be on PlayStation later this year, I believe.
Amazing! I didn't know that. That's very exciting.
Yeah,
okay.
4 and 5. I think they've announced that. I hope they have. But yeah, it's coming. So please play it.
We'll keep it a secret for now.
Yeah, I think it's out there. I hope it is. So anyway, the setting of it is very much, it's a science fiction-ish kind of thing, and it involves, oh gosh, how do I describe the story without spoiling it? You sort of wake up and you in a underground bunker, not unlike Fallout, but then once you kind of get out of the bunker, you have to solve all these puzzles and uncover what's happening, why you're alone in this area, and there's a little bit of a steampunk, sort of a combination of like Victorian steampunk with Art Deco aesthetic. It's very cool, and I wanted to kind of have this involves a little bit of time travel-ish sort of stuff, maybe, and I wanted to reflect that with the hardware that I used to make the music. So I'm using modern synthesizers, both hardware over here, stuff on the computer. I'm using archaic stuff that like you can get for dirt cheap on Craigslist because it used to be cutting edge 30 years ago, and now it's not worth, the space it takes up in your room. I mean, honestly, so for people that don't know, this thing that I keep pointing to, the Master Performance System keyboard it's not a fancy keyboard. It's kind of a piece of junk. It cost me about $300, which is not that much for a vintage keyboard. And it's only vintage because it's old. It's not because it's desirable. And I managed to find one in the Los Angeles area, but I was like, this is the keyboard that Robin wrote the entire Myst soundtrack on. And as you're scrolling through it, you hear the sounds. You're like, those are the string pizzicatos he used for the main theme. That's the gong sound that you hear when it kind of like transitions into, a new area of the map. And they're not even processed. I think he did it all in 2 weeks. So speaking of complaining for having only 4 months, Robin did this iconic soundtrack in 2 weeks. So, you know, it was cobbling things together like that, cutting edge and archaic stuff, and you know, it's really easy to do textures and electronic music on a computer, easier than it's ever been in history. And yet, I think creatively, it's more interesting, at least for me, to to have some self-imposed limitations and see how I can overcome that. And I think I probably could have gotten a similar soundtrack using software, but it's like 15% cooler, you know, if I can quantify it.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, it's to me, it's more, it tickles my ear in a different way, and I have to like it first before anybody else can like it.
Of course. So, Maclaine, there have been some questions in the chat that I want to address.
Yeah.
One of which wants a tour of synths. Now, is that something you can do? Is your camera movable, or is it too complicated?
It's movable. It's movable to a point.
Okay.
Let me see.
If it's not too much trouble.
Let's see. This, pardon anyone who has motion sickness. Okay, this is about
just look away for a minute.
Okay, so
there you go.
Up top, let's see, that's my finger. Okay, this thing.
Yeah.
This is an Oberheim 2-voice Pro, or TVS1, which was a competitor, probably came out in mid-70s, 75, 76. Let's get this microphone out of the way. So it's sort of a competitor to the Moog, the Mini Moog, the Model D. It's in that family. It's technically not a monosynth. You can play 2 voices at once, but you can see it's got a lot of fun knobs and things. The box next to it is a way to control it via MIDI. So it's funny. The synth is from the 80s. That box is from, I'm sorry, the synth is from the 70s. The box is from the 80s, and then I'm controlling it with my modern computer. And I can send MIDI data to it via that black box and those 2 yellow wires. This thing is called a Hawken Continuum. Let me see if I can get it out of the camera.
Those are so amazing.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's not plugged in, but if you can see, I can kind of press down into it. This is like the same material as a wetsuit, and I can control it going left to right, up and down, and then in and out. And it's just an unbelievably expressive. This feels like an alien instrument, and there's a lot of this on Firmament because I wanted it to feel like it was coming from not Earth, right? And it forces you to play in a different way. Okay,
do you know a track off the top of your head, Maclaine? By chance that I could play?
No, but when I sit down,
that's okay. Okay, yeah, go ahead. People are. This is great. Keep going.
Okay, this is a Moog 1. Where's the Moog logo? There it is. See.
Legit.
Now this is a fun tease. This I bought when I was working on Crucible, and this is maybe the one. This is like the one good thing that came out of it is I have this fun keyboard. But this thing is basically the Rolls Royce of keyboards. It can do anything. It can sound like anything. Whenever I think, oh, I should get a new synthesizer, I'm like, maybe I should turn this on and see if I can get the sounds out of it that I think this new synth is going to give me, because, you know, I should use this more than just buy a new thing. But yeah, incredible synth. If you know synths, this is like truly, the Rolls Royce. Okay, and then a lot of this stuff is what I use too. So there's some synths in here, but this is like rack gear. So this thing with the blue stripe is a reverb unit. Below it is the Roland JV880, which is also kind of undesirable synth from the 90s, but many soundtracks for movies, TV shows, games. A lot of Japanese composers, so like PlayStation games from the 90s have Roland JV stuff all over them. And then just effects, right? Like compressors, blah, blah, blah. This thing with the keypad is an Eventide H3000. And that is all over Firmament. There's like, there's this one patch in there called Stutter that I used too much, way too much. But that's a box from the 80s. And if you see any sort of recording studio photos from the 80s, 90s, even now, I always see, once you notice the keypad and the huge dial, I just see it in photos everywhere. But it's like this magic box. Okay, and then the last one I'll show you is this one on my desk here. This is a Prophet 6 desktop module. So this is hooked up to my keyboard, which is under my desk right here. See?
Yeah, very nice. Love that.
And this is kind of a space saver. So this is like this is like my bread and butter synth. And it is very advanced. It's not as advanced as the Moog, but just for pads, for arpeggios, it just sounds great. And it's so nice to have it right here and just be able to turn a knob and crank out a sound. So that's most of it. The one that's back there is a Yamaha CS50.
Okay.
This guy.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I'm going to put the camera back now.
Okay.
The CS50 is part of the same line of synths that the very famous, much more famous CS80 comes from. And
Yes.
the CS80 is like the Vangelis Blade Runner.
Yes.
It's that synth. Now that's like the little kid version of it. Is not quite as cool, and might not stick around that much longer. I have my eyes on the next thing I'm going to get. This is the last thing I'll talk about. Is synth geek stuff.
We're not. Yeah. Carry on.
I love gear.
No, I know. So do we. Yeah.
Okay, good. So I got that. I got a good deal on it, and I was like, cool. It's a Yamaha CS, whatever. I can do the Blade Runner thing. For people who don't know, to buy a CS80 now, you should go look them out. They're very cool looking. It costs like $50,000-$60,000, and that's not an exaggeration. And then if you get a good deal on one for $20,000 or $30,000, then you got to put 10 grand of work into it to get it to run. Usually, they're very extraordinarily complicated machines, and I got to say, if you're not Vangelis, like they're performance machines. You know, it's not like, oh, it has all these great effects or all the route. You know, it's very simple in terms of the synth architecture because they came out in the late 70s. It's not very sophisticated. Like your phone is more powerful than it. It's more about a couple of really. It has this thing called poly aftertouch, which means you can play the keys, and then if you press a little bit harder on any of them, you can modulate or change certain parameters of the sound, which is also very common. But usually on most keyboards, it's just they're called it's just called regular aftertouch. So like you press down the keys, and if you press any one of them harder, it changes the character of all the notes at the same time. Whereas on the CS stuff, you can play 10 notes on it, or 8 notes, and each one of those 8 notes will respond differently to the additional pressure of your fingers. Incredible, right? An incredible achievement then and now. And Vangelis is a genius, and an unbelievable piano player. And when you watch him play, he's incredible to watch. And I'm not Vangelis. Most people that own CS80s are not Vangelis, and they can't get that. They do the thing where they bring up the brass, preset, which is what he used on Blade Runner. They bring that up. They're like, wow, dump reverb all over it. Cool, Blade Runner. Then there's like a touch strip on the top of it where you can make the pitch of the note go slowly down. So they go like, wow, and they do the Blade Runner thing, and they're like, wow, it's worth all the money I spent on it. and then they never get the maximum sort of value out of the instrument. So I got that, and I was like, cool, it does the Blade Runner thing a little bit. And then I was like, I'm not a good enough keyboard player to get the most out of this instrument, and it doesn't have MIDI, so I can't control it with my computer. It doesn't even have what the Oberheim does, which is called control voltage, which is how that little black box converts MIDI to control voltage, which is how I can control it from my computer. This doesn't have that. So I kind of have to be able to either play it really good or it just sits there, and it's just been sitting there. So what I'm going to do, hopefully, is start, now that I'm home from my session, I'm going to sell it, I think. If anybody wants to buy it, please get in touch with me. I'll give you a good deal. And then I'm going to buy a vintage ARP 2600. And for people that don't know what the ARP 2600 is, it's a very another famous synthesizer that was used to make the voice of R2-D2 on Star Wars. And I have some fun. I don't want to spoil the secret because I might post about this in a couple of weeks on Instagram, but I'm working on a way to perfectly recreate R2-D2, but I need the synthesizer first. I have some other elements that I've seen people try to make that sound on YouTube, and they do it wrong, and I'm going to do it right.
Nice.
And also, like, if you're old like me, there's a song called Frankenstein by the Edgar Winter Group, and you can find videos of him performing that. You've heard it before. It goes like ba da ba 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 da ba 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 da ba ba da boodle doodle doodle doodle. Right? It's like classic rock staple. There's videos of him playing it live on some German show on YouTube. In fact, I'm going to find that in the chat because now I'm all worked up about the ARP 2600.
That's good.
Let's see, Edgar Winter, Frankenstein. Yeah, so you should watch this because it's really cool. It's a fun tune. And then here as he's playing it, there's a keyboard solo, and he plays he is before the keytar was even invented, but he takes the keyboard controller for the ARP and has it on a guitar strap around his neck and is playing this incredible solo. And then he like sits down at this thing and it's like turning all the knobs. And anyway, I'm going to get one. That to me is more useful than that thing. So that's most of my gear, I will say. I've got a lot more, but that's about it for now.
Yeah. Another question. I'm scrolling back. Okay. Nikhil, I hope I'm saying your name properly, and if I'm not, I'm very sorry. Wants to know, do you lock yourself in with music theory while composing, or is it natural to just play and figure that out after, oh, that's Lydian, or that's changed to a harmonic minor and that sounds nice? And then also wonders how that translates to instrumentation decisions, which is an interesting, I like that was the additional question. So do you want me to repeat any of that, or is that?
No, that's great. Okay. Yeah, great question. I'm going to turn the AC on because now I'm all worked up talking about synths. So the answer is yes and no, right? Like like many people probably, found out at a young age that music came easier to me than other things. But to me, what the metaphor I use to describe that is like, yes, everyone, every few generations, you might get a Mozart who's just like a total child prodigy, right? But even Mozart, I'm assuming, had to put in work, right? So the way I describe it is that like, if we're all trying to run the same race, if getting better at music is a race, which it's not really a competition, but it's a clunky metaphor. I started the race like 2 laps ahead, right? But then I still have to run that race, and I still have to try to outrun people who are working just as hard to win as I am. So it still takes work. So like, music, I understand it on a fundamental level, maybe more than some people, but to me, that's the sort of mystical part of it. And then the rest of it is just work. And I've spent decades thinking about it and studying it and trying to get better at it. But even still, after all these decades, I say this is kind of a morbid thought, but I'll die before I know all the things that I want to know about music, right? I'll be learning until I can't learn anymore for whatever reason. So in terms of music theory stuff, everybody sort of has this arc, I think, because I've talked about this with people, and I think it's something that you can't force this process where you're young, you fall in love with music, you want to make music. Oh, I can make music, and I'm making these connections where, oh, that's what they're doing. For me, I started as a guitar player, and I just could figure out, I learned a couple scale shapes. I did take some lessons and things, and then all of a sudden you go, oh, that's what this person's doing. They're playing this scale, or they're playing this chord. Cool. Now that goes in the memory banks, and I can bring that up whenever I want. Then you go a little further and you start to study, what the notes on the page mean and how they interact with each other. And maybe you start learning a little bit of piano. I mean, to me, I'm not a great piano player, but I have a piano over there. I've got one right in front of me, and I've got plenty of synths, as we've all seen. And the beauty of the piano is that it's just linear. It's all laid out in front of you. And it becomes much easier to put things together when you can just see it. Whereas a guitar is both like horizontal and vertical. And to me, the playing of the guitar, I still sort of see shapes of scales and things when I'm playing in my brain because it's been drilled into my brain. But like when I'm playing, it's very intuitive. I don't really think about it all that much because I've been doing it for so long. And that's the easiest. That was the instrument I found that everything came the easiest on. So I've like taken that one a little bit further than other instruments. But the piano is an amazing tool, and I think of it as a tool, not really it doesn't feel like an instrument in my hands. It's just a tool. So in regards to the other stuff, I went to music school, and they have a way, they have a curriculum that they drill into you and teach you about modes and, the harmonic relationships, both like basic and advanced and all that stuff. And then it's up to you. So then what happens when you start learning the rules of music, you think, well, it has to be done by the book. And when you're in school, it does, because you don't want to fail. Right. And so there's this, they don't tell you that in school. And I wish they did, but it doesn't behoove them to tell you this, because then you might not go to school. But the reason they're teaching you a certain way is, one is that's the way it's been taught for centuries. And then two is you've got to, there's a curriculum. They have to sort of prove that before you started the class, you didn't know this. Afterwards, you did, right? You passed the test. And the psychological effect that can have on you is that there's only one way to do it. It's the one way that will get you to pass the test. And that's not true. We're not all, white male composers living in Vienna in the 17th century. So that's a very specific way to make music, and you can learn that, and it's very effective. And then from there up through, the Rite of Spring, it's like, yes, that form of music, it got very advanced, and people continue to push it and push it and push it. It's in the history of music throughout humanity. That's just a little sliver of it. And so I think that when you go to school to study Western art music, which is what that is, it kind of gets drilled into your head that that's the only way to do it, and that's not the case. And even in Europe, before Bach and things like that, there you can find music that they're breaking those rules all the time. In fact, that's more interesting to me, is listening to early, like medieval and Renaissance music, because its stuff is weird. You're like, oh, I recognize these instruments, but they don't resolve in the way that I think they should. The melodies don't have the same shape that you would expect, and I love that stuff. So, and then of course in the 20th century, all the rules got thrown out, for better or for worse. Some of that stuff is academic and maybe unlistenable. But now, okay, after all these decades, I'm at the point where I get to put all this stuff into practice, and I've had to unlearn that kind of rigid way of thinking about music. So when I sit down to write, it's all intuition. It starts with intuition, and I've got decades of studying, in me that are internalized. But I don't sit down and say, I'm going to write something in Mixolydian, in D Mixolydian. I mean, every once in a while, sometimes you do, because they can be a short, for media scoring, which is what games scoring is. It can be a shorthand, right? If you're writing something that's supposed to be wondrous and ethereal, then you might do something in Lydian, right? C major, D major. Just keep going back and forth between those two chords, and you'll recognize that sound immediately. But then what are you going to do? Those are just two chords. You got to figure out some other stuff. So it has to start with intuition, and the music theory gets applied afterwards. I see it like a toolbox where, now I'm a guy, I always joke, I have soft hands. I don't build things. I know how to make music, but I can't repair, the cabinets in my kitchen. But if I did, let's say I'm working on something and I've only got one tool. I've only got the hammer, right? But I've got a saw. I've got to this is going to be a really weird metaphor. Let's say I'm building something, and I need to trim a little bit off, and I've only got this hammer. I'm like, well, this isn't the right tool. Let me go find the right one. And I go find some saw or a file just to make sure that I can get this dovetail joint perfect. That's what music theory is. You start doing stuff, it's intuitive. You go, oh, I like the sound of that. I wonder if I can figure out a way to connect it to this other thing that I also like the sound of. Then you go, aha, here's how this scale can do it. Here's how I can modulate from this key to that key. And that's something that has only happened through doing it repeatedly for many years. And only probably in the last 5 years do I feel like I'm completely free, right? Like the rules are mine to make or break. And now I know enough music theory that I can find a way to justify anything that I'm doing. Instead of saying, this is the way it's done, I say, I think if I did this, if somebody asked me, how did you get from, this key to that key? I'd be like, yeah, it's kind of like this, it doesn't matter. Just do it, Yeah. So I hope that answers the question.
I think so. And, there are times that you and I have talked that does come up, theory. And back to Secrets of the Obscure, we talked a lot about polytonality and how that does affect your instrumentation decisions, right? Because if you want to put D major over C major, it could sound like a cluster, or it could sound like, something beautiful and ethereal, depending on how you do score it. So talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Sure. So that again is something that you can start to kind of learn through textbooks. There's some great books out there that will help you solve a couple problems, or I should say, excuse me, not solve, but avoid mistakes early on. So you might think with polytonality, if you're studying it and maybe you're just transcribing it, something like a John Williams piece, go listen to the opening chord of Jurassic Park. I've talked about this before, but not the soundtrack presentation that only has 12 tracks. If you can find the score in movie order, the opening titles is very ethereal, and there's this kind of bum bum, and then this huge choir chord comes in. It's massive.
So beautiful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's an incredible chord, and that's the essence of polytonality. It's extremely, or extended harmony, whatever you want to call it. But it's it's not a C major. It's a pretty wild chord.
Right.
So, so maybe you sit down and transcribe that, and you're like, how on earth did he come up with this chord? He must be a genius, right? And he also is obviously an incredible musician, but has spent decades and decades studying it. So, you know, there's books like 20th Century Harmony by Persichetti, which is that kind of this sort of turquoise book that's sitting on my piano, which is great. It's like
classic.
You got to know a little bit of music theory to get into, but it's so cut and dry. He's like, if you go to the polytonality chapter, he's like, here's this chord, and here's why it works, right? In fact, my favorite one, I can't really do it because that's too far away from the mic. But if you sit at your piano and you play, let's see, a C major in second inversion. How do I do this? Here, I'm gonna do this because everybody has a piano should do this, and this is like my test that I do on new synths just to see if this works the same way. So okay. This is invert. You're probably seeing this backwards, unfortunately.
No, we're not. That's your left hand, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So this voicing of a C major. So this is middle C right here. So below middle C. Play that, and then play a G up here above middle C in first, in root position. Just play that at the same time on a piano, and it'll give you goosebumps. It's the most incredible, like crunchy, resonating sound, and you can tell, you know, obviously C, like the G is in the chord of C, we know that.
Yes.
But B and D are not technically. So the way there's something about the spacing of that chord and the way the physics of sound are being produced that it just all of a sudden it's like, whoa, it's like your head just kind of goes into another dimension. So I play that a lot. That's like my warm-up chord.
Nice.
And that's like straight out of that book. And then others, you know, so that sounds great on piano. There's other really interesting sort of polytonal chords that don't sound that great on the piano. And that the reason is because the way sound is produced on a piano is, you know, you hit a key and there's a hammer that strikes. If it's one of the lower notes, it's striking one very thick steel string. But most of the strings in the piano there's multiple strings per note, right? So you might hit middle C, and that's going to be 3 steel strings that are tuned to C. But the way a piano is tuned is everything is slightly out of tune. It sounds counterintuitive, but every note is just slightly out of tune to a very specific mathematical ratio so that you can play anywhere from the bottom to the top of the keyboard.
Equal temperament is what that's called.
Exactly. Which is a fairly recent invention.
In the history of music, recent.
In the history of music, yeah. So the issue with that is there are certain things that won't have those really perfect sort of relationships between the overtones and the harmonics of those notes. But if you played that same exact chord on, let's say, in a string section and you orchestrated it from, you know, just cellos, violas, and violins, it's going to sound perfect. And one of the advantages of those instruments is they can play the in between, they can micro adjust the tuning so that they're perfectly locked in tune. Whereas in a piano, the tuning is fixed, depending on how in tune the last time you had it tuned. So, you know, it's the kind of thing that you can only learn that through experience. And I will say that the failsafe, I said this maybe when we were talking about Secrets of the Obscure last year, you can kind of throw anything at the strings and it'll just sort of sound good. And especially if you have a good string section, they'll make it sound good. And I didn't know that for a long time, is that they listen to each other. It sounds so basic and, you know, of course they do this, but like when they're playing, they're listening to each other and making those adjustments so that they lock perfectly in harmony. Whereas on a computer, you can't do that. Either a piano or even the best sample libraries on a computer can't do that, right? They're fixed, you know, the material is fixed to whatever they recorded on the day. I forget, how did we get on this point? I was talking,
we were talking about, you know, music theory, but also how that affects your instrumentation choices.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So when you start to learn sort of these advanced musical applications of music theory, then you start to learn within that, there's another subset of knowledge, which is what I just talked about what works depending on the instrument, right? So we're talking about instrumentation. Well, that chord I have to trust that this is going to sound great on the strings. It's not going to sound good on the brass or the woodwinds or the piano or a synthesizer or a sampled string library. But I know that on a project where maybe we have the luxury of going to record some strings, then, okay, I can trust that they'll get this. Even a mediocre string section will be able to get this. So yeah, it's there. Unfortunately, there's no shortcuts. And I think that a lot of people, myself included, wish they could get further in the race than they can, but It just takes time. You have to have the benefit of working on projects that allow you to sort of stretch a little bit. Hopefully you get the resources to record with live players, but you know, I'm sure that anybody can find a small string, even if it's a community orchestra, and it might take you a little bit longer to sort of get to the point where it would sound as good as an orchestra in LA or something like that. But working with live players is the closest thing to a shortcut to getting better at music as there is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. A question here from Michelle about End of Dragons, which is great because another fantastic score that you did for Guild Wars. Mm-hmm. Very opposite from Secrets of Obscure for many reasons, not least of which is the amount of time that you got to spend with it and to learn about. And I love this soundtrack. For those of you unfamiliar with the End of Dragons music, that's where I learned a lot about Korean classical music and instruments, and because of you, Maclaine. So what Michelle is asking is, how much music theory did you use in your composing when using traditional Korean instruments for Guild Wars, or was that also something you did naturally after familiarizing yourself with the music?
Yeah. Michelle and I met at GDC, by the way. So hi, Michelle.
Cool.
It's good to see you in here.
Yeah.
The Game Developers Conference.
And everybody, let me just play just a tiny, if you don't mind, I'll play a little bit of that, because I did put it in here, even though I didn't know if we'd talk about it. It's just so beautiful. So this is just, I think, the title track, End of Dragons. Like, I hope you listen to that too and appreciate it, because that's really good. And I love the performances you got from those musicians too. I mean, just absolutely, really eye-opening if you've never heard those instruments before. Yeah. And what a beautiful experience. So, all right, now that we've done that, go ahead and talk about it.
So you can go, I will say, if you want a much more in-depth version of this conversation, Emily and I did a whole episode about that's on YouTube. It
was a long one.
Because there's a lot to talk about. But the basic version of it is, in the West here, and I include, the US or North America, South America, and Europe, Western Europe, or I guess all of Europe is all West, depending where you start on the map. But our conception of what East Asian music is very much informed by popular media, for better or for worse, right? So stereotypes exist. The idea of a stereotype is fairly neutral, right? It's like maybe a slightly pejorative term, but the idea is that we have a basic concept of something that's unfamiliar to us, or there's enough of a pattern that we can create this like little nugget of a trope that says it's this. And it's usually based on some form of reality. So with East Asian music, our concept of it is a sort of droney, bass line, and then pentatonic scales moving over it, which is a 5-note scale. And those 5 notes can alter, but it's kind of like you're sort of limited. The pentatonic scale is common to pretty much all musical cultures throughout history, because just the physics of sound, when people started to kind of realize they could control sound a little bit, the pentatonic scale was sort of the first thing that emerged because of the way you make sound. Is the most simple way I can put that.
Yes.
Um, and so each culture took that and ran with it in a different way. And so in East Asia, it's still very common that a lot of their music is based on the pentatonic scale or versions of the pentatonic scale over these sort of drones. And it's like you get a bamboo flute to play it, you know, do some little overblown like chuffs and harmonic sort of stuff, and great, you're good. And then it's Asia. That's like Hollywood's version of Asia, and has been for a long time. And it is based in some element of reality, except it's much more complicated than that, right? If you were going the opposite way and say this is, you know, if you're in East Asia, you say, well, what's Western music like? It's like, well, they kind of take this crazy looking thing that's made out of wood and they drag hair across it and they play, you know, more notes than we do. They play 7 notes instead of 5. Oh, okay, great. That's all of Western music. That's kind of what it seems like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had to understand what, you know, I had to widen my scope of what that meant to me. Because if you look at me, I'm not Asian. I have no sort of Korean background, certainly, or anything else. I'm very much a, you know, British Isles descendant by way of America and Germany, a little bit of Germany. So I had to do some studying, and it took a long time. It took me a long time to break off those sort of shackles of what I thought this music meant. You know, and again, in East Asia, there are 3 massive groupings. There's China, Japan, Korea. Those are the 3 big ones. And we hear a lot of Chinese music and Japanese music filtered through pop culture because we've been strip mining their stories and importing them because people like samurai movies or they like kung fu movies is kind of really what it comes down to. Korea is this big blind spot for a lot of people, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But they have their own version of this kind of musical technique. And so I had to really dig deep, and it wasn't easy. But I have the benefit of, first of all, the benefit of YouTube, which is this amazing resource. And then living in Los Angeles, Los Angeles has the largest Korean population outside of Korea. So a lot of that culture is kind of in the air in a way. And it's still tricky because I don't speak or read Korean, so it's hard to find it sometimes. But like, for instance, that crazy, very nasal sounding instrument that does the really wide vibrato on the start of the theme. You know, I have one. It's not me playing it, believe me, but it's called a taepyeongso, and I can't play it because I'm missing the reed, which is actually just a plastic drinking straw that they cut and then make a little trapezoid at the end of it. But you know, it's based on a Chinese instrument. It has this many holes, and this is like what they call a conical bore, meaning it constantly grows in size till the very end. And it's loud. But that's not so much the important part of it, or even what notes it can play. It's that vibrato, right? That's the first thing that you notice. And that was the first thing my ears latched onto. And I said, okay, I got to figure out why they're doing that, and how that becomes idiomatic for all of their instruments, because the flutes do it, the strings, the sort of plucked zither instruments do it, the vocal tradition involved,
the singers, the vocalists,
yeah. So you know, it's finding those sort of that. Again, I encourage you, if you're really interested, to watch the talk that Emily and I did previously about this, because I go into a lot more detail about it. But it started there. I had to find a way in to make this make sense to me. And part of it was studying these instruments on YouTube. Part of it was finding whatever I could locally or buying it on eBay or something, trying to get a note out of it. And then talking to people. That's a big one. You know, again, finding people that know more than you do, and you might feel like an idiot asking them the most basic questions, but it's important. And it's important to honor that tradition, I think, especially if you're coming at it from an outsider. And I think we did a good job, personally.
Yeah. It's such an amazing soundtrack. I love that one. And a little more hybrid too. There's a lot of cool electronic stuff you did in End of Dragons as well.
Yeah, that one feels like a new era for me. It feels like I've kind of figured out, whoa, there's some crazy hair floating behind me. Do you see that on the camera?
Yes, sir. I didn't. Oh. Hair monster.
Like massive. It's probably for my cats. It's probably stuck to me when I came in today. Yeah, that one. So again, talking about breaking the rules. When you write for an orchestra, you know, the sound you want to hear is basically a recreation of, you know, the most beautiful concert halls in Europe or the big scoring stages here in LA or London or something. Lush, reverb, right? And they all know how to play together really well and blend. And cool, yeah, but we've been doing that for hundreds of years. What if we push things a little further? We live in this amazing technological era. What if you put a flanger on the entire woodwind section? You know, What if you put a distorted delay on a cello? Like, what if you did that? What would that sound like? Because you do that with electronic instruments or even just electric guitars. That's not even that new. But how can we treat the orchestra as this like sacred thing that you can't? It has to sound exactly like it does in real life, and it has to be the most natural sound. Well, why? Who cares? You know. And that this is not even a super new idea, right? Like Hans Zimmer basically had that idea 25 years ago and changed how movies were scored. But games still seem a little bit stuck in the mud. So End of Dragons felt like it felt like a breakthrough for me creatively and sonically. I thought, cool, I've got a handle on what the orchestra does. Finally, after 12 years of doing this and several decades of studying music, so let me see what else I've got in me. And I feel like that idea has touched pretty much everything. Even Firmament, it has some of those elements. Or I did a game called Salt and Sacrifice a few years ago that also had very, very similar. We don't have an orchestra on it. There's just a cello and some guitar stuff that I did here. But they're manipulated in weird ways, in ways that would be maybe sacrilegious to the people that run Deutsche Grammophon, the record label. But to me, it sounds interesting, and if it sounds cool, then it is cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I am looking at the time, so I just want to be kind of aware of that. I think we have a few minutes here, but I just, I want to give you a chance.
I talk a lot.
No, it's good. It's good. I want you to talk about Crucible for a minute, because I think, you probably haven't had a chance to talk about it much. And
no, never.
I did say that we would talk about it.
Yeah.
And again, this is, a lot of times, pardon me, a lot of times I feel like when games are canceled or projects are halted, a lot of times then you don't get to talk about it. You don't hear about it, and you certainly don't get to hear the music.
Yeah.
There is just endless amounts of gigabytes upon gigabytes of terabytes of music out there we'll never hear for projects and see the art and all those kinds of things. But this is not that case. You've got 6 tracks up from the game up on your website.
Yeah.
And that's what you've got up there. Yeah. 6 tracks. And, I just talk about that experience and what that was like.
Sure. Yeah. So Crucible, for people who don't know, which I'm assuming is everybody, was going to be a game that was made by Amazon Game Studios. They about now almost probably a decade ago, they had this huge press event where they announced Amazon is getting into games, and they announced like 4 or 5 games. Almost all of them were canceled before they came out. In fact, I can't remember if they even announced Crucible, but I think they realized, well, we got to get something out. So that ended up, for better or for worse, being the first real game that Amazon developed from scratch. And oh, you've got up to 30 minutes left. Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah, we're good. Yep.
So they had an enormous team of unbelievably talented people. They really cherry picked some of the best in terms of game development. They were developing this game up in Seattle. A lot of people that I knew and worked with at ArenaNet, after Guild Wars 2 was out the door and a couple of expansions, rightly so, they were sort of looking for a new challenge and saw this as a new challenge. So they had all this talent. The original composer was, so the game itself is like a third-person multiplayer hero shooter, basically. An amalgamation of Overwatch-y, Apex. I think it came out maybe just after Apex, but like that idea of that what every game is nowadays, but there was less of them back then. The original composer was Sarah Schachner, and she had been hired to do it. And Sarah is an incredible composer. Love Sarah's music. Speaking of being creative and strange, especially she is a string player and she plays a lot of strings on her own stuff, but is an incredible sound designer and synthesist and takes that stuff and pushes it so far in a really interesting direction. So she had written the theme for the game, like a menu sort of loop kind of thing, and 1 or 2 character themes. Most of those games don't have a ton of music in them during the gameplay because you're communicating with people constantly. But what they wanted was essentially like a hero theme for every single character that you would hear on the main screen, which is cool. That means you get a chance to really flex your thematic muscles, and it's not just wallpaper music. It took a very long time for them to develop it, and they had a lot of stumbling blocks before I even came on. And eventually Sarah's schedule didn't allow her to finish it. I think she went to go work on Anthem at that point. Another game that was sadly doomed, but lasted a little bit longer. So then I came in and took over. And I was like, great, I love this. I get to work on a sci-fi game. I get to use all my synths. And I get to do what I like doing, which is write melodies, write tunes.
Yep.
That's something I think of all the things that I do musically, everything feels like a real challenge and an uphill battle, except I know how to write a melody. That's the one thing that is not hard for me. If I can
combat music, that's not your favorite. We talk about that.
Yeah,
sometimes.
well, yeah. we'll try to avoid going
yeah, we won't
this time.
Carry on with Crucible. Yeah.
yeah. And yeah, there was no combat music, which was nice. So I got all this cool concept art from all these characters. I got to see some of the gameplay. I got to go up there and play it once or twice in Seattle. And then I got to just kind of daydream, and it was like come up with 2 or 3 minutes of something that is the theme, and make sure that it feels tailored towards these characters. And it was really, really fun. I worked on it for about 8 months, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, it was so rewarding. And I it's this thing that happens where you think, well, this happens a lot when you do this job. First of all, you hear no more often than you hear yes. So even getting to the point where you hear yes, we do want to hire you for this project. Oh my God, that's like such a big win. Because for every 10 or 20 no's, that there's one yes, or 50 no's for every one yes. So that feels like a win. And then you see some of the art, and you're like, oh, cool. I've always wanted to work on a game like this, or because it's Amazon, it's got a lot of resources, so they'll, the marketing will be good and it'll be a success. And maybe as a freelancer, you have to keep that in mind, where you think maybe this will lead to another gig, once it's out there. And that's all stuff that you can't control, right? The only thing you can control is how good of a job you do. But you hope that everybody else feels the same way and is doing the best job they can. And I do believe they are, or were, on that particular project. And unfortunately, the game came out and didn't do so well, and has now been essentially wiped from the internet. They haven't taken down the YouTube page yet, so you can see some of the trailer and early marketing material. But they made a little bit of a push when the game launched. But I think that what they wanted to do was mimic Apex Legends launch strategy, which was it came out of nowhere, right? For people that maybe don't remember, it was like they dropped it on a Friday, and it was one of these things that by the end of the weekend, everybody's like, have you seen this game? Like, it's awesome. And it just immediately was a success overnight. But that's unfortunately unduplicatable, I think, even with a game that is as fun or as polished. And I will say, hopefully nobody from Amazon's watching, but Crucible was not quite as polished as Apex was. And I think that was a big issue. So it went away and nothing ever came of it. And it's not even on Spotify or YouTube. Like, the only place you can hear the music is on my website. Yeah. Which seems crazy to me.
I mean, it is crazy, but it's also crazy to me that they even let you have it like that, to me, because we've all heard those stories, right? Where someone blood, sweat, and tears a soundtrack, and then it's just gone forever and you can't use it again. So how did that work? Is that something you wrote into your contract, or how did that
work? So that was me being a little bit naive. So in 2015 is when I left Seattle and moved to San Francisco. And at the time I left ArenaNet and went out as a freelancer. And it was a bit of a gamble because I was on staff at ArenaNet, getting paid a salary, doing music, which is a luxury. And people are like, why would you leave that? But it was life stuff that I had to leave. And I thought, well, maybe this is an opportunity to kind of launch myself as a freelancer and see if I can pick up some other projects and have a little bit more variety in my creative life. But I don't have an agent, or at the time I didn't, and I don't have a lawyer, and there's really no sort of contract stuff to work out. So I didn't know what I didn't know. And this job kind of, came, I had to pitch for it. It didn't fall in my lap. But I won the pitch, and great. Now we got to talk about the contract. And I was like, I don't know, just like anybody creative that you feel a little bit guilty almost asking to get paid, which you shouldn't, but it's tough. It was tough for me. And then the other issue is that because they had hired Sarah previously, some of the money had been spent, and they're like, well, this is what we got. And I was like, great, you're going to pay me to do this? Awesome. And I kind of just like, show me where to sign. So I didn't know what to ask for. The first big mistake I made was saying, yeah, you can just pay me everything when the job is done. And then about a couple months in, I was like, oh, I need to like pay my bills. And can I get like an advance because I'm broke. And then then all this, then I get this like one massive sort of payment at the very end, not massive, but like, you know, enough that I was like,
Yeah.
okay, now I can pay my credit card bill that I've been just paying the minimum on for 6 months. But then in terms of the music stuff, there was no language about that, which was a big mistake on my part, and I didn't know that this would come to bite me. So the game came out, didn't do so great, got shut down after it went back into beta after like a month, which I've never heard of a game doing that before. And then it never came out of beta. They turned the servers off. They said, thank you for everyone who played. We'll refund you if you bought X, Y, and Z thing, and goodbye. Basically, goodbye forever.
Yeah.
So at that point I was like, well, what? Okay. So the music is really good, I think. And part of what they paid me, I spent out of my own fee to go have somebody mix it, like a professional, one of the best people in town to have him mix it. So I got all this great music that no one's ever going to hear. And I thought, well, okay, I kind of need this stuff to send out. Do I have permission to send this as part of a demo reel if I'm pitching for something else? Can I put it out publicly, or do I always have to keep it secret? So I basically asked the audio director who was there, who was previously the audio director at ArenaNet, the guy who hired me at ArenaNet.
Oh, wow.
James.
Okay.
I said, James, hey, I think I made a mistake in my contract, but like, do I have any rights to the music whatsoever? And he had to kind of ask nicely. And they said, yeah, as long as it's on your website and it's not downloadable, and you're not trying to make money off of it, then you can put it up there. And I was like, that's all I need to know. Now, that was a few years ago. James is not there anymore. Almost nobody I know that worked on Crucible is there anymore. So if some lawyer is watching this that works for Amazon, like, please don't send me a cease and desist, because I'll bet that they let it slip through the cracks, and I'm sure that somebody would prefer that I take it down. But I'm in defiance. I'll leave it up there until some.
Yeah. Well, it's great. It's great music. Let's hear some of it, because it's really great. I enjoyed it. I listened to all of it 4 times. So yeah. So here's I'm just going to say Rahi and the Brother.
Yep.
The hero. Actually, let me make sure nothing is playing on Spotify before I start playing stuff on your website. Okay. That'd be some polytonality, wouldn't it? All right, here we go. Yeah. About listening through this was how you do kind of switch between major and minor, quickly, which I thought was really fun. So talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Sure. So that's, again, when I'm writing, I need to have like a hook, the thing that kind of gets me inspired right away. And that can be 2 chords moving between each other. It can be a melodic phrase. And in this case, it was just that simple of going between major and minor. It's such a simple thing, but it really is, it causes you to sort of, what was I watching the other day somebody was talking about this, where they were talking about like the element of surprise. I think it was Sting, actually. I was watching an interview with Sting.
Oh, amazing.
And he was saying that the essence of music is like surprise. You have to, there's only so many notes and there's only so many ways of putting them together. And pretty much everybody's already done it all, to some degree. So you have to find new ways to be like, well, I'm in my brain as I'm casually listening to something, oh, it'll go to this, right? Or it's sitting in this zone on this chord or this note or whatever, this feel, and I'm comfortable there. Wait a second, it just changed, right? And in a pop song, that's like going from the verse to the chorus. In a symphony, it's going from an adagio to a scherzo, or that kind of thing. It's like changing tempo, changing key. So going from major to minor is kind of the simplest way of doing that, but it's so effective. So it starts off doing that, and it's in the game, this character of Rahi and the Brother, it's like this big sort of boisterous Captain Nemo figure. In fact, my suspicion is that he's based on Captain Nemo because he's of South Asian sort of descent, even though it's a futuristic sci-fi game. And in the original 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Captain Nemo is supposed to be from India. So I think he's sort of based on that. He's this big, larger-than-life character, kind of like Gimli in The Lord of the Rings, except actually tall, but like big personality. And then the brother is this little floaty robot that follows him around. So it's supposed to, but he's almost like a legend throughout the galaxy. This is what I was told. And he's just called, the two of them together as a unit are just called the hero. Right. And so this is like the hero theme. And so it's got to be uplifting. It's got to be adventurous. It's got to be this thing like Superman. When he comes into you, like, oh my God, you can't just help but be blown away by this, a god on Earth. Right. So that's kind of the vibe that I was going for. And then in the music itself, it starts with a violin solo. The same person who played the violin solo on the Secrets of the Obscure theme, by the way.
Oh, nice.
Named Paul Cartwright, great violinist.
Yeah,
he plays the theme, and then it immediately goes to the same theme in a different key, played on the cello. And that's so the higher it's this simple sometimes. The higher pitched one, the violin, that's the little robot guy, brother. Yeah. And then the cello, big, boisterous, like full-bodied, is Rahi, right? And so they constantly go back and forth. And if you listen to the whole track, by the end, their melodies sort of weave together, and it's it shows the relationship between the two characters. And one other thing I'll say, this I remember when I tweeted about, back when I was on Twitter, I tweeted this, and I had some people being like, "What are you talking about? This is insane!" And then they'd go to piano and try it. The chord progress. This was one of the first moments where I realized I can make up the rules if I want to. So the chords are very simple, heroic sounding stuff where it's in a minor key. Let's say it's in C minor, which is my favorite key, by the way. It's the one my hands always default to. So you go, A flat, B flat, C, A flat major, B flat major, C minor, right? Just typical 6, 7, 1. Or if you're in a major key, you can sort of borrow the chords and it's flat 6, flat 7, 1. It's just like, that's like every Iron Maiden song, every Black Sabbath song is that. It's like such a classic chord progression. But when you play that, it feels so uplifting. It feels so heroic.
Yes.
And so that's how it starts. It goes da 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 da, and the bass is sort of moving up with that melody, right? Yep. And then I was like, I wonder if I can do this. I wonder if I can justify this. So the root motion of the bass, let's say you're going A flat, cool. Now then you're in B flat. Well, what if that B flat, instead of being the root of the 7 chord in C minor, what if that's the leading tone, as they say, which is a major 7, to a new key. So the way it resolves, if you're talking Western music theory, is it resolves up a half step. So if it's solfege, it's T do, right? Do re mi fa sol la ti do ti do. There's a half step there. So what if instead of going up to C minor, you went up to B minor, right? Which is a very strange modulation, but it's one of these modulations that, first of all, it justifies itself. You're like, yeah, fine, sure. B flat is now A sharp, and it's going to B minor instead of going to C minor. And you can do every time you do that chord progression, you can just do it. So I do it like 4 times in a row, and the key signature keeps dropping by a half step, which is a very weird way to modulate. Usually it's the opposite, especially if you're trying to do something uplifting. But it's that element of surprise. It's so surprising. You're like, whoa, we're in this key now. So I do it a lot. So listen for that and sit down at the piano. It's kind of fun.
Let's hear it one more time.
Six, 7, 1. Okay. 6, 7. Now up a half step.
That's great. Yep, love it.
Yeah,
it keeps doing that. It does.
It does it 3 or 4 times in a row. Yeah,
love it. Absolutely wonderful. I want to try and catch up on a couple of questions I missed here, because I know that now we do need to wrap up pretty soon. Somebody asked about using Slendro or Pelog. Are these plugins? Slendro?
Where
If
do you see
Daniel Wilhelm is still around, it was at 1:26 p.m. So for me, so just kind of back up.
Okay, you've used Slendro or I've never heard of those, so I think the
Okay.
answer is
Okay.
no. But let me just Google them
Okay.
and make sure.
Yeah, Google that stuff. And then I thought there was
Oh, I see.
another one I missed.
These are scale names.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So these look like Balinese, like gamelan.
The
Yeah,
other
you know,
massive Asian country influence,
yeah.
India, right?
I
So
have
yeah.
used these a little bit, but gamelan music is so. So for people that don't know, gamelan is a musical form that originates in Bali, which is like a small island nation, Southeast Asia. And like many island nations, it's like things find their way there. And then if it's sort of, isolated, they're so isolated that it develops in isolation for many, many hundreds or thousands of years. And then all of a sudden somebody goes there and be like, whoa, people are doing some really interesting stuff there. Like it's like, so this is not musical, but like the island of Madagascar is the only place where lemurs exist on Earth, because
Right.
at some point there was some sort of proto mammal that lived in Africa, and then that chunk of Africa split off, or something happened, right? An iceberg carved out the ocean between it, and now lemurs only exist on one island on Earth. So gamelan is kind of like that for music. Incredible music. Has definitely been strip mined a lot for Western stuff for quite a long time. Even going back to like Debussy, like pre media, somehow during the age of exploration, some people found that music and the composers were enchanted by it. But it's very rhythmic. They play all these metallic kind of instruments that are also intentionally out of tune in a very specific way, so that when you hit them with hammers, they like beat. You can hear the frequencies kind of fighting with each other, and you hear that like when you open your car door on the highway, and you hear like whoa 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 whoa. It's like that, and it's all very intentional. So I've done some stuff that's like gamelan adjacent. I've tried to study it, but it's so complex. I even, when I lived in San Francisco, I was working on a canceled game project. I was going to try to incorporate some gamelan music, and one of the few gamelan groups. It's a huge ensemble that does this, right? Anywhere from 10 to 30 people playing different sized instruments of these percussion instruments. One of the few groups in America that performs this music is in the East Bay in Oakland, in the Bay Area. And I went and sat in on one of their classes to try to understand their approach to rhythm and harmony and stuff. And I forgot to bring earplugs, which is a huge mistake because it was very loud.
Yeah.
They literally are hitting brass tines with hammers, and many of them. You can imagine how deafening that is. Yeah. But yeah, it's one of those areas of study that I haven't had enough time or a project to really justify diving into it. But my favorite form of gamelan is actually not with the metallophone instruments. It's called jagog, which is very similar in that there's a big battery of percussionists playing it, but instead of it being made out of metal, it's made out of bamboo. So it has that kind of interesting sort of hollow, warm, bamboo-y sound. But the bass version of that instrument is so large, they literally look like they're sitting on cannons. Like it's this huge object that they sit on, and there's massive like 10-foot bamboo shoots. But the pitch is so low that you almost don't hear the fundamental, you only hear the overtones. And so when you hear the music, it almost sounds like someone's kind of singing in the background, but it's actually the bass playing. And it probably sounds different live. I've never been able to hear it live, but it sounds so cool. And I think famously, most people have probably heard it if they've ever seen Akira, the 80s animated film, which is like this incredible, one of my favorites. But the opening track, when the kids are riding their motorcycles through Neo Tokyo, it's called Kaneda, Kaneda. His track is propelled by this jagog music.
Oh,
so
nice.
Cool. I love it. So someday I'll get to work on it.
Someday.
And use some of that stuff.
What DAW do you use?
Cubase.
Cubase?
Yeah.
We use Logic. But we don't make music. We make podcasts.
I used Logic for many years. I'm not really a partisan when it comes to that stuff. It was just natural. I used Logic for the first few years. I was at ArenaNet working on sound design, but then we all kind of realized it made sense for us to all be on the same platform so we could share sessions. And we also were developing a PC game, and Logic is only on the Mac, so it didn't make sense to have I would have to have a Mac where I'd make sounds and then turn on the PC and then put them in the game and like transport them over. So we just switched to PC, and Nuendo.
Yeah.
We're using Nuendo, which is sort of the post-production version of Cubase, but that is Mac and PC. And then when I started doing just music, it made sense to use Cubase.
Yeah, sure. And then last question, favorite composers in games and film? Which is I know, right? Yeah.
That's
but
the question.
Try.
Yeah, I mean, in film, obviously it's John Williams, and it's such a default answer. It's like, what's your favorite band? The Beatles. I mean, kids don't maybe say that these days, but that's my answer. But it seems so obvious, right? But it's obvious for a reason, because he's the best. But I will say that, and I think I've said this to you, Emily, maybe in the past, or somebody else when I've been talking to them. I don't really do the John Williams thing. There's people who are amazing at it, like Gordy Hobb is incredible at that. Will Roger, they can do the or at least the Star Warsy version of John Williams, but I don't really write like that. What I've found, if anybody, I'm closer now. This is me inflating my own sense of self, but I'm more of a Jerry Goldsmith and like a late period Jerry Goldsmith. So by the last decade or so of Jerry's career, he still had an unbelievable depth of knowledge of music and the orchestra and composition and orchestration. But he also knew what his job was as a film composer, which is to serve the story and get out of the way. And his stuff is incredibly simple when you really start to break it down. And the fun part is like finding the moments where it's not so simple. But one of my favorite scores of his is Total Recall, right? And the opening, what's interesting about that one is the opening theme is like, it's in a weird time signature. So that's what makes it interesting. But musically, what's happening in the orchestra is not that complicated. Or like his First Contact score for Star Trek First Contact was one of his, that was definitely towards the end of his life in the last sort of decade. Beautiful theme, very simple. And it's funny when you listen to the theme, you get to hear the contrast between 70s Jerry Goldsmith that did the original theme, bum, ba, ba, bum, 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 right? That one's like very muscular and has a lot going on. And then it transitions into the First Contact theme, which is beautiful and lyrical. And it's kind of fun to hear them both side by side. Other ones, John Powell, I did a thing. So I don't know John, but I know some people that know him here in town. And I just through Instagram, I know his partner, whose name is Holly, and she's an amazing singer. And she was doing a thing for his birthday where she put out on Instagram, like, draw a picture of John and send it to me. And I was like, okay. So I found a picture to reference him, and I drew this picture of him, which I think it's pretty good. Just
that's
sort of
really great.
But it's been sitting here on my desk. So I have this like little angry John Powell staring at me while I'm working.
I love that you wrote it on staff paper. That's so cute. Yeah.
I don't know how he felt about it when he saw it, but anyway, I love John Powell. He's one of the last people that writes great tunes, I think, these days. His like How to Train Your Dragon scores or How to Train a Dragon, they're unbelievable. I mean, he's just he's too good to be working these days, but I'm thankful that he is, because we need somebody that still writes a tune. In games, I mean, I love Gordy's music for the Star Wars games. I love Austin Wintory, of course, both as a person and his music is incredible. And his desire to, speaking of stereotypes, I think it's easy to say, well, Austin's the Journey composer, right? And he is. But I think if you asked him, his desire is to see how far he can push himself. So like some of my favorite scores of his are like the Banner Saga. Love his writing on the Banner Saga. Abzu, I think, is amazing.
Oh gosh,
what's the other game that company did? Where it had all this like
he didn't do Flower.
Mongolian kind of music.
I can't remember that game company. Journey.
No, it's
Austin Wintory's having an AMA today, it looks like.
Oh, great. Giant squid.
Yeah, so that's pretty exciting. Go to the AMA for Austin. Ask him what his favorite popsicle flavor is, or something like that.
The Pathless. That's the game I was thinking of. The Pathless. I love.
Oh, the Pathless. I forgot all about that game. Yeah. Very cool. Well, Stray Gods too. Somebody's calling that out. That talk about an innovation in, just what game audio could be narratively.
Unbelievable.
But we do need to wrap up. We have 1 minute left. So
yes. Okay. Stray Gods. Find Austin talking about Stray Gods. I think there's something maybe on the GDC YouTube channel. But like in terms of
sure.
pushing the medium forward, it's one of those things when somebody describes it to you, you think, well, there's no way it's that as complicated as I'm imagining it. And it is. And he did something that no one has done before and utilized game audio to make something to truly break ground, which is very rare.
Yes.
So yeah, those are my answers for today.
All right. Well, Maclaine Diemer, thank you so much. I hope everybody has a chance to listen to your music and follow your career, because it's just always a pleasure to talk with you and hear your new music. And so grateful to AirCon24 for having us on. So honored for that invitation, and great to spend this time with Maclaine. And just reach out to us individually. We chat. We have a Discord. Maclaine sometimes pops in our Discord and stuff like that. So big thanks to Lewis and everybody over at Airwiggles. And everybody just keep rocking the audio. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everyone. And thank you, Emily. I appreciate it.